Welcome to our channel. Again, my name is Clever Banganai, and I'm here with my colleague. Good evening, Tisieto Magama. How are you? I hope you are well there where you are sitting in the Northern Cape.
No, I am. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me, Clever. It's a pleasure to be here.
No, thank you so much. Last time we spoke together, we wanted to come up with some of these topics that we would be able to analyze from the global south perspective. And today's topic is a very hot topic, actually, which is going on currently around the world, which is Ethiopia, war, lies, and propaganda. I know that you researched quite well in this topic, Mr. Magama, and I want us for our viewers so that they can understand, so that we can start before we get into what is happening currently in Ethiopia. As you know, last week I attended a march which I actually recorded and did a clip for Telesur of the Ethiopians that were marching against the Western media mostly, and the US interference in Ethiopia, as well as the EU, who are interfering in the conflict that we have seen, which started some few years now. I think you will explain to us exactly, because that's the topic that we're going to speak for today. And when I saw that, I saw quite a big contingent of the Ethiopians that are staying outside Ethiopia or in South Africa. I didn't actually know that there was quite a big number of Ethiopians staying here, and I would understand that some of them were actually here because they had fled their country in the early 90s, and they went throughout the world. And some of these people are here because of that conflict that happened in the 90s. But I want us, first of all, before we even start getting into this, to watch this short video that I took of the Ethiopians marching and going to hand over this memorandum of demands to the US and to the EU. And you could just see the passion that these people had there. Let's just watch this. No, thank you. I think we have seen you have seen some visuals of these people marching in Ethiopia, and the passion that they had about their country. Young people, old people, women, all of them of all kinds that came to show and to vest their disdain on the interference of these Western powers. If you can take us through currently, like now, what are the narratives that are coming from the West on the conflict in Ethiopia currently?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Clever. Perhaps just a short comment on the marches that we had in South Africa. Indeed, Ethiopians came out in huge numbers across the country, as a matter of fact. Of course, as usual, the media focuses on the capital cities, Pretoria, Johannesburg, Cape Town. But where I am, for instance, in the Northern Cape, in a small, relatively middle-sized town, there were also protests that were taking place of the local Ethiopian community, together with locals, because I think for the first time in a very long time on the continent and in the diaspora, even of amongst those who are not Ethiopians themselves, there is much more of an awareness, that the African continent has always been and still is under attack of some sort by foreign powers, especially the West, who are still hankering, for the old type of colonialism of our continent, apparently not satisfied with the neo-colonialism, where they really control the continent, from a distance. Now, so what is happening in Ethiopia is indeed playing itself out within that context. But there are also other.
In fact, while you were saying that, what I also saw, what I can just part of the things that these protesters were saying, it was the what you can say, if it was a country to be patriotism, but they've got what I would call African patriotism, African or pan-Africanist in view, because they were saying Ethiopia is one of the countries that was never colonized. They want to colonize it now, so let's unite as Africans and fight against this. Put our differences aside and fight this imperialism. I think, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Just wanted to point out.
Absolutely. No, it's a very pertinent issue. Clever, it's a pertinent issue. Thank you for really, emphasizing that point. Because you see, our continent's weakness has always been the fact that Africa, within the continent, we've always acted as either countries, and within countries, we've always acted largely, at least on the continent, as tribes and clans and so on. And what we see is a resurgence of the kind of Pan-Africanism that our continent's, iconic leadership like Nkrumah, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, and others really pursued, which is the kind of Africanism that saw Africa as one continent, and that understood very well that what is happening in one part of the continent is actually affecting another part of the continent. And it is the same movement that you see in countries like Burkina Faso. You see the same in Mali, where, the Baginabe and Malians are simply tired of French interference,
yes.
in the affairs of their countries. And so, the no more, #no more movement actually arose, yes, specifically within the context of Ethiopia, but it deals with, it embraces much more, larger issues, like this, characteristics of neocolonialism that we see. A country like Niger, its mineral resources still belong to France and the United States. And this is the case throughout most of the continent. Hence, there is this reaction by the West to China's, partnership with African countries, because then China is displacing, Western hegemony over the African continent. And so I'm saying that the #no more movement is intricately linked to that, new awareness, that resurgence of the kind of African patriotism,
Pan-Africanism, which is in most at large is being driven by young people. That was one of my interesting observations that I've seen.
And that is the most encouraging factor here. What you have here are not ideologues of former liberation movements. These are young people, mostly around 30 and under 30, who from within the continent on the motherland, but also from afar in other countries, see the devastation caused by these foreign powers on the African continent, and have decided to take a stand, a very clear stand on this particular matter. So it's quite encouraging. So perhaps then, having set the stage for what is happening in Ethiopia, it's important perhaps then to look at what really is the Western narrative.
Yes.
So what we see from Western mainstream media outlets And I would venture to say when Western mainstream media propaganda outlets,
Yes,
like
definitely.
BBC, CNN, your MSNBC, your Bloomberg, your even Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera,
Is
yes,
that
yes.
yes, indeed. I mean, they're at the forefront of peddling a narrative that the Ethiopian government, the democratically elected government of Ethiopia, is waging a brutal war against its own people. They seek to portray the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front as freedom fighters. They make allegations, against the Ethiopian government, such as that the Ethiopian government is using foreign aid, humanitarian aid, as a weapon in this war. And of course, they have made a hoo-ha about the arrest of UN, officials. Perhaps it should be noted, Ethiopian UN officials.
Yes.
So really, in broad terms, that is what you see from the Western mainstream narrative. This, of course, is echoed by the State Department of the United States government. It's echoed, by the British Foreign Office and other Western countries. So what is clear, I think, to most of us, is that this is a coordinated campaign of what Prime Minister Abiy called disinformation.
No, you're right. You're right. I mean, I want you to mirror this with exactly what happens in the Hong Kong, and also the media campaign that came up with the issue of the Chinese Muslims. Um, uh, and the same thing, you can see that same narrative is being carried. The Hong Kong Free Hong Kong campaign that was being done through the Western media, and the sort of the defense of Muslims in China, and saying the Chinese are brutally attacking and putting the Muslim community in China into a sort of refugee camps and all these other things. You could just mirror that and see and just give similarities of those two issues.
No, certainly, Clever. What you have is, and this goes beyond even Hong Kong. I mean, look, this is a classic CIA playbook. You've seen this in 2014 in Ukraine, for instance, with the so-called democracy, uprising. You've seen that earlier on with the various color revolutions, the Velvet Revolution, the Orange Revolution, and so on. And you've seen at least elements of this in the so-called Arab Spring, so this is replicated over and over. We've seen that, for instance, the very same playbook being taken out in Haiti, during the 2004 period, during
Yes. Yeah.
the leadership of Jean-Bertrand Aristide. And so you've seen this happening in Brazil, you've seen this in Argentina, you've seen this in Bolivia, you've seen this. So there is a systematic demonization of the legitimate democratically elected government of a country that is not part of the US Western constellation.
No,
and so what
no,
we
no,
see is precisely
no.
that.
Yes, definitely. I mean, you put it right way there. So in this, while trying to unpack the issues, what is happening in Ethiopia, I think it's also very much important for our viewers to be able to get a distinct overview or even a summary of the historical perspective of Ethiopia. If you can give us, because as I've said, these protesters, some of them said this is one of the countries that has never been colonized, and they want to come and colonize. If you can give us that sort of history, because the history of Ethiopia is quite a distinct history to most African countries who actually went into liberation wars and fought, and some of them in different ways by different colonizers. I mean, like you've said now, the English, the French, the Italians, the Germans, and so on. But with With Ethiopia, it's a little bit a different history on that. If you can just give us that historical perspective of Ethiopia as a country and Ethiopia as a nation.
No, no, absolutely. And I think it's important, especially for understanding the TPLF and where it comes from, to know, I mean, to have at least a broad sense. And so I'll just, enunciate 1-2 basic facts about Ethiopian history that I think most of our viewers would be familiar with. Correctly, Ethiopia is the one African country that has never been colonized. As a matter of fact, in 1936, the fascist Italian regime, invaded Ethiopia with a view of subjecting or subjugating Ethiopia as one of its colonies. The Ethiopian people fight gallant battles against them. They are victorious only to the extent that they managed to occupy Ethiopia for the next 5 years. In 1941, with the help, of course, of the British, the Ethiopians fight a successful battle. They are victorious over the Italians. In the process, Italy is also overthrown. Is also defeated, in World War II. And Haile Selassie, who had gone into exile, came back and is reinstalled as emperor. Now, but then Selassie runs what is generally accepted as an Amhara ethnic supremacist regime. He goes around, he goes forward, he bans languages of the Oromo and other tribes in public institutions and so on. So he runs quite a repressive regime. In 1974, he's then overthrown in a military coup by what became known as the Derg, D-E-R-G. Now, the Derg is an Dabaric word, meaning junta, the Spanish junta regime, a military, regime. So Selassie is then assassinated, and the Derg, the junta, imposes, an authoritarian, highly repressive authoritarian regime until its downfall.
And then from there, you also see now the emergence of the TPLF. Can you just give us the perspective history? How did they come up to formulate this what was they called then the liberation movement that then was then against this government trying to fight the junta? What was the emergence of the TPLF?
In the same year, in the same year of the assassination of Selassie, the TPLF really is an organization that...
By the way, sorry to interrupt you. Just give us what is TPLF? Because our viewers might not understand what TPLF is.
TPLF is the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front.
Okay.
It's an organization that is established mainly by young students, who were studying in Addis Ababa and elsewhere. And they were called the Association of Tigrayan Progressives. Of course, with another group that was in Tigray itself. Tigray is a region of Ethiopia in the northern part of the country.
Okay.
And so the TPLF, their principal objective upon their establishment really was to secede from Ethiopia, as an independent republic in a greater Tigray.
So it was not a nationalist objective.
No, it wasn't. From the very onset, the TPLF was a ethno-nationalist organization whose primary principal objective was liberation of the Tigrayan people.
Okay.
This was enunciated in their 1975 constitution and indeed in their manifesto in 1975. So, but then the TPLF links up with other liberation movements that had already existed at that time. You had, on the one hand, you had the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party, the EPRP, which really was at that time the most inclusive liberation movement, consisting of essentially all tribes, in Ethiopia. Who then, on their part, were then also linked with the EPLF, that is now the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, just next door, as you would know. Eritrea and Ethiopia, share the same borders. Well, today, but then at some point during the reign of Selassie, they were essentially amalgamated as one country. And so they then fought alongside each other, over the years. I'm not going to get into the tussles between them.
Yes.
But suffice it to say that they were allies at that point. The EPRP and the EPLF. The TPLF was sort of a junior partner because it really had links with the Ethiopian, National Liberation Organization.
Okay.
So I think that is important. So what is important to understand, that this is really an ethno-nationalistic organization. It's very poignant that the TPLF once, which in fact was at the beginning pretty much reliant on the EPL, what is that called? The EPRP,
yes.
right? The Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Party,
yes,
who were allied to the Eritrean People's Liberation Front. Upon gaining a bit of strength, the TPLF, who received funding, received military equipment, resources, training, through their connection with the EPRP from their Eritrean compatriots, actually launched, an attack on the EPRP forces that were based in Tigray, and expelled the group from that region. So it's the kind of organization that the TPLF has always been. And perhaps, to get a look into the ethno-nationalistic thinking of the TPLF. There's a highly informative article written by Eritrean historian Alam Seget Tesfaye. In this article titled, The March of Folly Reenacted in 1999, there he recounts how during a visit to a camp in Eritrea, the Tigrayan leadership lamented the oppression and denigration suffered at the hands of what they call the Amharas. Now, this is in reference to all other ethnic groups in Ethiopia, and indeed in Eritrea. So basically, when they outlined their entire thinking, but also what their overriding objective was. And so Alam Seget says, and let me quote him here. He says, my own personal experience with the Weyane leadership came in 1979, when two of their leaders visited the base areas of the EPLF and made a speaking talk. I attended one of these and heard a speaker lament and condemn the indignities and insults suffered by the people of Tigray. He even ran down the list of degrading nicknames and other peoples, including, by the way, Eritreans, attached to them. All that, he said, was to be put right. I remember distinctly leaving the meeting puzzled by the speech. He discussed neither ideology, which we had all expected, nor Ethiopian nationalism, which would have been natural. There was no doubt, we all concluded, that the TPLF's loyalty was to Tigray, not Ethiopia as a whole. So this is, perfectly captures the ethno-nationalistic tendencies prevalent in the TPLF since their inception in 1975.
Okay. And then they go on to fight, and you as I understand, they then toppled the regime that was there, and then they came into power. Can you maybe just take us through now TPLF coming into power?
Yes, absolutely. Look, at that time, in the mid to late 80s in Ethiopia, so there were a lot of mergers and alliances that were being formed, between the various, liberation movements fighting against the military junta, the Derg, and in Ethiopia. And so the TPLF emerged as a leader of this coalition of movements as they fought a protracted war against the Derg, which they eventually overthrew in 1991. So they emerged as leader of this coalition, which was called the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, the EPRDF, acronym. And they emerged as the leader, of that broad coalition of various organizations.
Okay, so take us and then give us the characteristic, what characterized the rule of TPLF when they come into power in 1991.
Well, of course, as they have emerged as the leader of this coalition, the EPRDF, they then, of course, once in power, as the leading party within the coalition, that is the first amongst equals, so to speak. TPLF rule of Ethiopia since 1991 was a regime that was, characterized by widespread corruption. It had developed, embraced harsh anti-democratic, credentials. The TPLF created a security and surveillance state in that country, which of course was meant to keep other ethnic groups in check. They, amongst other things, launched a war against their former allies, Eritrea, repeating, Mengistu and Haile Selassie's mistakes of attempting to annex a coastal area, especially the area of Assab in Ethiopia, in Eritrea into Ethiopia. Because remember, Clever, Ethiopia is a landlocked country with no direct access to the seas. And I mean, previous leaders, Mengistu, even Haile Selassie, tried to, incorporate parts of Eritrea, so that they can become a coastal country.
Yes.
Which of course was a very crucial, which is a very crucial, transportation link for Ethiopia. Of course, they also, TPLF went ahead, they imposed a ethnic federalism on Ethiopia after they captured state power from the Derg. They imposed a Tigrayan ethno-supremacy, in the country. They started to implement essentially their Greater Tigray Region project, which they had enunciated already in 1976 through their constitution and their manifesto. And so this project, amongst others, included the expansion of the Tigray region by incorporating parts of Amhara region and the Wollo region, including in terms of their planning, incorporating or annexing a part of Sudan and also another part of Eritrea. So what they then did essentially is they systematically changed the demographics, of these regions, by the systematic transfer of Tigrayans into those regions, and expanding and entrenching Tigrayan economic and political domination, in these other regions, the Wollo region, the Amhara region. And so from then on, what you then saw is that they instituted a system, where, in 1998, they essentially attacked, through their military police and later the army, Eritrea, where they expelled Eritrean villages, from an area called Batme, that is just on the border, a border town between Ethiopia and Eritrea. They went on a wide scale project of essentially ethnic cleansing, for the lack of a better word, just to ensure and reinforce Tigrayan control of that part of Eritrea.
And as you said, and to get access to the coastal, to the sea.
Yes, we spoke about that. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I think the other issues that are crucial to understand about the TPLF when they were in power is that, the TPLF instituted a harsh authoritarian form of government that did not mess around. They imprisoned their critics. I mean, Ethiopians will tell you, how thousands of Ethiopians just disappeared. To this day, nobody knows where they are. They ruled Ethiopia with an iron fist, and in the process, putting in place a vast network of sympathetic businesses, members, supporters, sympathizers of the TPLF, in these businesses. But at a geopolitical level, what Ethiopia under TPLF rule did, under TPLF rule did, they became a U.S. proxy for destabilizing the Horn of Africa. Okay. And they did this through, destabilizing activities, in Sudan, the neighboring Sudan, neighboring Kenya, northern Kenya, in Somalia. As we know, they launched a war in Somalia, in 2006 with a full-scale invasion. They launched multiple military incursions, into Somalia from 1996 early on, and occupying towns and so on of that particular country. So this was the TPLF, that Ethiopians had to deal with, had to live under, since 1991.
So could you say that also their rule is also linked to the massive displacement of Ethiopians throughout in Ethiopia itself, but also them having been, like I've said to you, we've seen quite a number of large numbers of Ethiopians living in South Africa, but they also say that there's quite a big number of Ethiopians living in Europe and in the United States itself. Is this type of immigration or migration or displacement of these Ethiopians part as refugees and part of them as political refugees that went into these other countries? Could it have been also come from the rule of the TPLF in these 27 years that they were in power?
No, absolutely. If you look at the waves of migration out of Ethiopia, there's a wave of migration, that happened. Of course, there was the wave, with the Italian invasion. That's how people like Haile Selassie ended up, in France, in European countries generally. There were others also that left. You had another wave of migrations or immigrations, in the mid to late 1970s. That was when the junta, became the government. We had another round of, migration that were happening from the just after around the mid 90s, to the early 2000s, especially. And then, of course, another wave in the early 2000s that we saw until a few years ago. And so, I mean, in South Africa alone, for instance, there is, some numbers are bandied around, but there are numbers thrown around like about 1 million or so Ethiopians, but as you would know, in South Africa, they are not confined to a camp. They are not, they are essentially integrated into the local community. So they live in mainly African townships and in, central business districts, around the country. So you've had these waves of migration that took place. And if you compare them, they track with the political developments, in Ethiopia itself. And it is unarguable that the largest waves of migration took place under TPLF rule.
Okay. So, Mr. Magama, just now, we have seen TPLF in power, and what you've explained, the characteristic of their regime and their proxy to the United States. And then we come into some social and political upheavals that came in where we see protests coming up from the streets, from the people in the streets who are not happy with the TPLF. Can you take us in that? I think that is what went through up to when we had mobilization of people coming up, and then coming the election of Abiy as prime minister. Can you take us through how TPLF then lost power?
Sure. Look, Owen, I mean, there was widespread discontent, in Ethiopia. And so you had a wave of protests that were taking place that started in about 2015, in the Oromo region, started there and, became widespread throughout the country. And, the Ethiopian armed forces under TPLF rule killed and maimed hundreds of Ethiopians in trying to stem the tides of these peaceful protests. I mean, these were peaceful protests. Of course, it's ironic that at that time, I mean, the West didn't protest the brutality of the TPLF in putting down these peaceful, genuinely peaceful protests. And so what then happened was, with the death of Meles Zenawi, the prime minister at the time, Haile Mariam was then became the prime minister, and he took over Ethiopia at the time when this upheaval was starting.
Okay.
And of course, couldn't manage the internal contradictions, and the rising political tensions within the coalition itself, but also, amongst the restiveness of the population. He was then forced to resign. And subsequently, the coalition, the EPRDP came together, had to elect a new prime minister when he resigned. The other coalition partners then, managed to outmaneuver the TPLF this time around, and they managed to elect Abiy Ahmed, who is of both Amharic and Oromo parentage, and he became prime minister in 2018. Subsequently.
Okay, so now we then look, we then go through Abiy's vision of how he wanted to take Ethiopia forward, and coming up from 2018, 2019, we come into the COVID-19 and so on and so on. Can you just take us through that period up until what then happened with this new wave of TPLF now coming to want to go into its own and pursuing its objective of secession of that region again, as you have said that early when they were fighting that other regime, they never had a nationalist agenda. Just take us through that period until where we are currently.
Yeah, sure. Look, what subsequently happened was, once Abiy became prime minister of Ethiopia, he moved swiftly. He sacked top TPLF officials from their security posts. Generals were arrested on corruption and graft and bribery and so on. He introduced changes in the Tigrayan dominance of the armed forces. He subsequently released, political prisoners who were held in secret prisons across the country. He welcomed back exiled dissidents and critics of the former TPLF government. He started, just overhauling the entire state apparatus, including lifting restrictions on the media. The result was that the TPLF basically withdrew to its base. It withdrew to Tigray in the north of the country. And so Abiy went ahead, he, on the regional front, geopolitics, he swiftly moved as well to finalize the peace treaty with Eritrea, which of course, as we know, won him the Nobel Peace Prize. He quickly embraced Ethiopia's neighbors. He engaged with Kenya, he engaged with Somalia, trying to build friendships there. He tried to, unsuccessfully though, but tried to find a reasonable, amicable solution to the controversy between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia around the construction of the Renaissance Dam. But all these developments led to a situation where the TPLF felt isolated.
Okay.
Because now, for the first time, you had Eritrea and Ethiopia, neighbors, at peace with each other. Right? So they could not use Eritrean territory to attack Ethiopia in the future. Right? And so they felt quite constrained in that sense. Now, leading to the crisis that we are facing today. Now, it's important to note that I think one of the earlier points of conflict, not conflict, but tension between the central government and the TPLF, was that the central government, the federal government, requested the Tigrayan state, that is now the region, to hand over fugitives from justice who were former TPLF government officials who abused their positions and were responsible for heinous crimes against the Ethiopian people. The Tigrayan state, regional state, the TPLF essentially refused to do that. Of course, that was just one point of tension. Major bone of contention was that Ethiopia was scheduled to hold their general elections on 29 August 2020. Now, in May 2020, the Ethiopian parliament, the House of Representatives, voted to delay the elections, until the following year in June 2021, due to the COVID pandemic, which of course was sweeping throughout the entire world. It's not unheard of. I mean, it's commonplace that many countries around the world postponed their elections, for a date during 2020, because then at that point, we were at the height of the pandemic. Now, however, the TPLF decided to disregard that decision of the federal government and the parliament, and went ahead and held regional elections in Tigray, in the Tigray region, and they, of course, won those elections by 98.2%, and of course, winning 100% of the 152 seats, in the state. And so what you have essentially in Tigray is a one-party region. 100% of the seats. And so, of course, this created a major point of escalation between the federal government, whose constitutional authority was being undermined, TPLF in a region of Ethiopia. And so on 3 November, with these tensions that were there, simmering, but nothing explosive at that point. On 3 November, that evening, the TPLF attacked the Ethiopian National Defense Force headquarters of the Northern Command. Remember, Tigray is in the north of Ethiopia. And so attacked the Northern Command, attacked other surrounding army bases and munitions depots, and killed an estimated 6,000, army personnel, which then, of course, was the direct precursor to the civil war that we see today.
So now explain how do the champions of democracy in the world, Europe and the United States, knowing the history, knowing the what exactly happened. I mean, if it was in the United States, California decided to do its own elections and elect its own governor without the approval of the federal government, would you think that would be accepted for in the West? I mean, they know that this region, it needs to get its approval. Even in South Africa, you cannot have Mpumalanga going to elections on its own when you do not have the national elections. They decide no, we are going to go to elections, and therefore we're gonna elect our own, and you find that there's a party there that just goes and elect its own premier without going through the constitutional ways that things are done in South Africa. They know this is what happened, but the champions of democracy of the world, the United States and Europe, they ignoring all these issues, and they come up with the propaganda through their media, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, to say the Ethiopian government is committing acts of brutality against the Tigray people. How do you relate to this? How, how is it possible that these people don't even say anything, that all this tension is caused by because people have decided not to go through democratic processes that are allowed, that are enshrined in the constitution of that country?
Look, I mean, it is clear to any reasonable person that the West, and in particular the United States, has defined itself outside the confines of international law. And therefore international law, and in many instances, rationality do not apply. It's a common cause fact that the US government and their Western allies have been acting hypocritical on almost every international issue of any significance. The kind of hypocrisy is beyond astounding. Look, let's remind ourselves of some of the historical examples. In 1960, now I can go back a little further, but let me use widely known examples. Let's look at the case of Patrice Emery Lumumba, democratically elected Prime Minister of the Congo. Is assassinated. A coup is staged against him with US support, using the United Nations for that matter, and he is assassinated, essentially under US tutelage. He is then replaced by a tyrant, Mobutu Sese Seko, who became the closest ally of the United States and the West. So this has been the story of the African continent, and indeed of Latin America.
Yes.
Right. How many governments have been overthrown in Latin America?
Oh.
From
Allende. You can say how many governments have not been overthrown. Then you can count.
Actually, yeah, exactly. That number is actually more countable than the number that have actually been overthrown.
Exactly.
And they were all replaced by right-wing, simply terrorist governments that terrorized the African and Latin American peoples for ages. The same applies in East Asia, especially Southeast Asia. Whether it's the Philippines, Laos, and so on and so on. And Myanmar that we see today with those upheavals had also been the beneficiary, pun intended, of course, of US largesse in that regard. So the hypocrisy, as astounding as it is, but it is exactly what you should and can expect from the United States, because it has always been its policy with its Western allies.
No, thank you so much, Tisetso, on this very, very informative program that, and also your input that you have given to this to our program. The history that you have given of Ethiopia, it will give, at least when we go forward with other episodes, it will then give the perspective of exactly how people should see these things that are happening in Ethiopia, and how they should be able to reflect. But it also gives to the rest of the African continent to look internally to say, what should we do with such things? How do we defend ourselves? How do we keep Africa together, especially to the youth, so that you will be able to defend the gains of all the independence that we have had since the establishment of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, which now is evolved to become African Union. How do we bring the rest of the African continent, and how do we pay solidarity with other countries, like peoples, especially peoples of suffering, like Ethiopians that are there? I haven't seen South Africans going out in the streets to protest on this regime change that is being driven from the United States and from Europe. I haven't seen any other countries doing that except the Ethiopians, who are actually doing it themselves. So what lessons should we learn from this, and what should be the message to the African continent, especially the youth, our governments, different parties, especially progressive parties in Africa and other organizations? How do we pay solidarity to each other, and how do we try and defend this continent, which has got so much wealth and vast amounts of resources that are being sought after by the West?
Absolutely. It's crucial that the African continent, especially its peoples, begin to act in unison, and move away from the notion that African unity will be pursued in the African Union. The African Union itself, as an organ, of states, has its own weaknesses, has its own flaws, but can only be strengthened in achieving its historic mandate by citizens of the African continent, rallying behind their organization, but also, taking on causes such as this, that amongst others, a call for the West to really stay out of Africa's business and let Africa deal with her own problems, firstly, but also secondly, I think one of the other issues that have to be dealt with is the proliferation of foreign bases on the African continent, foreign military bases, on the African continent. There's no reason why France or the UK or the US, for that matter, should have military bases, on the African continent. In fact, there are no compelling reasons for Africans. They might have compelling reasons, for geopolitical and strategic purposes. They might have reasons for geostrategic interests of these countries. But for Africans ourselves, there are no compelling reasons, why we should allow these European and American bases on our motherland. And so it's crucial, that we, as Africans, begin to act in unison and act in solidarity, correctly, as you pointed out, to address many of these problems.
Thank you so much. I also want to thank our viewers for this new episode our first episode that we have put in. We've got more episodes to come to discuss the issues that relate to the Global South. If you like what we are discussing here, we ask you please to press the like button and subscribe to our channel, and also put comments on the comment tab to just give us feedback on what other issues or what other topics should be discussed on this channel. We thank you. Would like to thank everyone, and we'll see you again in our next episode. Bye bye.